Okay, we're going to get started. This is a City Council study session for Monday, June 3rd, 2019. Our first topic is we're going to do a demonstration. Council is going to be changing the way we vote. So instead of it being audible and raising our hands, we are going to be using our iPads up here. And so our city clerk is going to give us a demonstration, and we all get to participate.
So good evening, City Council. Lita Hashi, Deputy City Clerk. So the first thing we need to do is when a motion is created, the mayor will ask the clerk to send for votes once the motion is sent to us. So you'll have to verbally tell us what the motion will be. I'll type it in, and then the mayor will ask to send for the votes.
So oftentimes in our agenda packets, there's a recommendation, and that recommendation language oftentimes is a motion if the council members so choose to use that. If it's something that it's not in our packet, it'll just take a little bit of time to type it, but otherwise they will have the motions as listed in our packet for use, unless it's
We'll take
changed.
it from the agenda. So if you wanted to.
Yes. Entertain a motion. I think Lita's going to pull up a motion for us.
Okay, did everybody receive a voting?
I'm not connected and updated.
Yeah,
tried
you need to be
rebooting.
in iCompass in order to get
I am
Okay.
connected, but it won't update. Yeah, same here.
Oh, yeah, mine too.
No, you won't be. Yeah, you
Yeah,
won't
me
be able
too.
to.
Mine's been spinning
Yeah,
about
you need
three,
to
4
you need to
minutes.
close it and open it back up. You may need to sign out and sign back in.
I already did that.
So don't. Yeah, I wouldn't.
Wait, I'm making a motion.
Yeah, let me know when everyone's got iCompass open.
Today, 10 minutes ago.
It just takes a little while for it to upload. It's been taking
All right.
a little longer.
So at the moment, I have it
Why don't we
moved by.
postpone it?
Well,
Same here.
sign out. Sign out and sign back in. No, not delete. Just sign out, upper right-hand corner, sign out of iCompass, and then sign back in.
I've already done that.
I can't help you with that. And I think the changes, if you don't want to update your iCompass for this evening, is that they just dropped off 2 items off the agenda. So the items on there are still identical, but. Gotcha.
Still spinning there.
So Zacchaeus was taken off for tomorrow, yes, and then the
Oh,
stormwater for
no, we're
this
not.
evening.
We're using tonight's agenda.
June 3rd. Oh. Is yours up?
But they made an additional change after they sent the email to tomorrow night.
So the motion that we're going to approve is,
So are we on the next topic now? or-
No. Well, if they can't get into their packets, they,
tried to
I'm assuming they want to get in. Pam, are you in or not yet? Nope,
Nobody's in.
okay. Okay, maybe we can share iPads?
Yeah, we can share it until they come up. Here, I'll swap you.
Okay,
I'll take yours. You take mine.
so why don't you go
at the
ahead and.
moment, it was moved by Councilmember Valderrama, and I need a second.
Second.
So,
Have anything up. It's supposed to be up here.
Pretend motion.
okay.
Blank motion, a blank second.
But no, it actually,
There it is.
it pops up. So if you, I see a blank square at the moment.
Me too.
Until everybody
again.
votes, I can't show the result.
But there's nothing to click
It
on.
says loading.
No, now it's
Okay, now it
asking
says
for the
loading.
vote.
We're practicing, we should be
Mine says to
moving something
approve, so
like,
we-
I move that we have
She's already
drinks at
got
9
it.
PM.
She's, yeah, approved the new electronic voting system. So go ahead and then vote. So one caution I will give council members, when you're voting, you can't undo your vote. So make sure you're clicking the right button for the motion, which is stated
What
right there.
happens if you really do undo? We've had a couple of occasions.
It has to be, you'll need to let the city clerk know right away before the vote is called. Once the vote is called, you can't undo it.
Only we can make the change over here.
Well, no, you can't change, it. There's no
No,
do-over,
she said we
Ken.
can
It's like
vote,
there's
but
no
nobody
voting in
here has the
baseball.
vote. That's the motion.
It's pretty easy. It says for, against, or
Oh, you
abstain.
have it?
Yes. So she brings up the motion. It looks like this.
So does abstain now change
And
the
then if
meaning?
I click for,
She did have it.
So Chrissy, our abstains have been
That's probably why.
in the
Councilmember Ross just
favorable. So
voted.
that will continue
if you,
or not?
yeah, no, if you abstain, yep, there's no change there.
Have the voting.
Then why show it then?
Well, no, you should just, maybe that's a good opportunity to put a little footnote that abstention on, if you have no conflict of interest.
I don't know if they,
abstention is the same as yes.
I don't know if they have that option for abstention.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what he said.
There was a question about why we have abstention on here. And I think it's, you can abstain from
That
a
is a-
vote,
yeah,
but
that is an option.
your vote is counted in the affirmative.
Right, it will be the affirmative vote if you abstain.
Right, and Lita, the only thing I was recommending
If
is
you have a conflict of
in your
interest,
screen
you're not voting at all.
is have a little asterisk on abstention and say,
It's not
if
an
you
abstention.
have no conflict of interest, this vote counts as yes. If you have a conflict of interest, you're allowed to abstain.
I don't think your vote doesn't get counted, though, does it? If you have a conflict of interest and cannot vote.
Right. I see, I have a COI on my button.
That's what I was just
So
saying.
I can indicate if it's conflict of interest
Yeah.
on my panel.
Asterisk says that it counted as yes,
So
we
that's,
abstain.
but it's not on yours, right? I guess you'll have to state it, that there's a conflict.
I'm going to try it again, maybe, now that I think most people have got. So if everyone can X out of that box.
It X'd out for me. Oh, I voted, that's why.
I'm going to try sending it again.
We're going to vote again?
Just so everybody
So
can
this is like reality. This is what-
X out today, then tomorrow, when we're in the full throes of an actual council meeting.
Okay, I'm going to send it again. Try it. Did you get anything, Troy?
Not yet.
I have a-
There's a delay. We've got a, box.
Mine's not, but it has at the bottom, continue vote.
Do you X out of it?
No, now it's coming up.
Okay. Okay.
So-
So go ahead and vote.
Yeah, I'm still not able to get in. so.
Rebooting because it's not coming up on.
Okay, and
Council
Karen's
Washington.
looks like hers is.
I'm just having trouble with agenda notes, so I think, and I'm a weird one, so I can practice.
It came up this afternoon, though, right? Or this morning? Okay. Of course. Expect nothing less.
I guess we have to keep working on this because
That's a quorum.
Well, so why don't we move to the next item, especially we have guests here, and then if there's, time left over at the end of the meeting, maybe we can try it
Can see how
one
the
more
others
time.
voted.
Just so that when we're using this tomorrow, that we're not trying it for the very first time.
okay, sounds good.
So our next discussion topic is the Transportation Master Plan and Transit 101. We have an informational presentation. Mr. City Manager.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, our interim Public Works Director, and she has presentation for you next. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening, Mayor, Council, community residents. We're here to give you some information, actually a lot of information about transit planning. This actually came about, excuse me, with a couple of questions and requests by council to get more information about the possibility of bringing transit into the city by the city. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what's going on regionally primarily with Sound Transit and Metro. And then our second presentation, again, is on more transit. We'll give you an update on the North Sammamish Park and Ride site location, and then just an update on the project. So I'm going to hand it over to Doug McIntyre. He'll be actually facilitating both discussions. So after we're done with the Transit 101 project, we'll transition and have Sound Transit join him at the desk up there. So feel free to answer or ask any questions as they go along. We've hopefully allocated a lot of time for questions.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good evening, Mayor Malchow and members of the council. My name is Doug McIntyre, and I'm a planner with the Department of Public Works. And to my right is Aaron Goose. He's an associate with Farron Piers, and he's going to be here presenting on transit planning, some fundamentals about transit planning and options and things to consider. So with that.
Great. Thank you for the time. Again, I'm Aaron Goose with Farron Piers, and Kendra Braylon is leading up the Transportation Master Plan with our firm, and I'm the Seattle area discipline leader in transit. So really, I'm just here as a resource to kind of get everybody on the same page, talking about what goes into transit planning, both locally and regionally, and really what that means for Sammamish, and particularly what that means for the Transportation Master Plan and how we think about transit as you're moving through that process. So really, I kind of mentioned we're really trying to talk through what are those transit planning fundamentals and what it really means for a city of Sammamish. So I'll walk through those fundamentals. I'll talk through some of the regional plans that King County Metro and Sound Transit have on the books. I'll talk more specifically about the service planning process that King County Metro goes through for how it allocates service. We'll talk through some local examples, how some neighboring cities and jurisdictions have really partnered with Metro in their planning process, and then dovetail that into some next steps for the city of Sammamish, particularly as it relates to the transportation master plan. So just key kind of transit planning fundamentals, what factors go into designing a transit system. We have listed here a few factors that transit agencies really weigh, some of the trade-offs related to how they provide service. When we talk about coverage, it's where the routes go, how close they are to your home, your destination, where you're trying to travel to. The frequency, again, is how often the vehicle arrives throughout the day. Is it a 15-minute headway? Is it 30 minutes? When we talk about service span, it's how long throughout the day, and particularly not just on weekdays, but on weekends, and what service is provided at what time of the day. Route alignments, again, are kind of which streets the service actually is located on, and which stops and areas that the service serves directly. And all of this goes into trade-offs. Obviously, we have fixed resources available for transit. This isn't a unique situation in the Pacific Northwest. It's every single agency goes through that trade-off discussion about trying to prioritize all of these factors that you see on the screen. And it comes down to really, who are you planning for as a transit agency? And one of the myths out there, planning for captive riders or choice riders. And so when we talk about captive riders, traditionally that's riders without other means of mobility. And so transit service is their main means of mobility versus choice riders, which obviously, as the name implies, have a choice, either a personal vehicle or some other means to get around. But the reality of what we've seen as far as travel behavior is if you provide good transit, whether you have a vehicle or other options, people will take that. And if you don't provide good transit, people will find other means to travel, even if they don't necessarily have a personal vehicle. The statistic on the right, I think, is very telling, particularly for the Pacific Northwest. 89% of all Metro riders have a vehicle at home. So they could be labeled technically choice riders. But the service traditionally throughout the region is good enough that they have other that they choose to ride transit for many of their trips. So when we think about planning, who are we planning for? It's really about planning for all, not just those that are maybe without a vehicle, planning for all to improve mobility and access throughout the region. I talked about some of these fundamentals, and I'm going to walk through them individually and really speak to what are those trade-offs, what are those elements that they look at specifically with these factors in evaluating those trade-offs, and what that means for budgeting and the amount of service that can be provided. One of the core fundamentals, obviously, with any sort of fixed route transit is land use and the density of population and jobs and services that are kind of aggregated to a particular area. Because when you have more density, there are more trips that are generated or pulled to that specific location, and that just leverages the economies of scale that fixed route transit and the number of seats that are on a vehicle, what that provides. And so, fixed route transit really needs that critical level of demand to make it viable for a particular time period or throughout the day. And a lot of research kind of looks at, what is that right level of density to support transit? There isn't necessarily one specific number. People have really tried to dial in on, is it 3,000 people per square mile? Is it 10,000? What does that mean for frequency? And there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It does come down to what are those connections, how frequent are those connections, and what are those connections to, and at what time of the day? King County Metro goes through their own service planning process, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, about how they weigh land use density in their service planning. And again, with the fourth bullet, again, it's coming down to funding for service. We obviously can't provide 5-minute frequency to every single house in the region. So you have to look at trade-offs for what level of service can be funded, where can it be provided in the most efficient and equitable means possible. Another key trade-off that transit agencies look at is this idea of frequency versus coverage. Again, speaking to what are your objectives, what are those evaluation criteria, who are you trying to serve? Traditionally, looking at frequency on its own, what you're trying to do is serve the highest density of people and jobs. It is often the most productive means if you operate more frequent transit on a limited number of arterials and routes. On the other side is looking at coverage, and so providing close access, availability of service to as many people as possible, but there is a trade-off. Obviously, as you distribute service further out, it can't run as frequently, and sometimes it's not as useful, but you're able to cover more people are potentially within walking distance, et cetera. And so different objectives are achieved with these two different allocation approaches. Another factor, I talked about service span. So when is service actually provided? We traditionally think of transit as kind of a all-day or a peak-only service. This chart highlights travel demand throughout the course of the day from the Puget Sound Regional Council Household Survey. And you can see, obviously, the AM and PM peak periods for when people are traveling, but there's still substantial demand in the midday. So agencies are continuously trying to balance that trade-off. If you provide more frequency during those peak commute times, obviously there's less availability of service either in the midday or in those early AM or late evening time periods when there's still travel, certainly, and there's still a need for available service, but it's a little more difficult to provide it with as much frequency. So it is that same kind of balance as what I just mentioned with frequency versus coverage, which is either you're trying to provide the most available service, so put perhaps 20 hours out of the day, but does that distribute some of the frequency that you could provide during those periods when the most people are trying to travel? So I was talking a little theoretical with these factors. I'm going to walk through a specific kind of Transit 101 route, if you will, just to see what that trade-off actually means if we're working within a fixed service hour budget. So we're not investing any additional hours. These options that I'll show all work under the same budget of service hours. In this particular example, we have a route kind of running along arterials, serving people and jobs. Operates 30 minutes in the peak period, less frequently during the off-peak and during the weekends, but it has service span both on the weekdays and the weekends from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. on weekdays and 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. on the weekends. So if we think about these factors and how you want to weigh the trade-offs and you want to serve different objectives, different travel markets, I'll walk through what those trade-offs look like. If you were to try to prioritize more peak frequency, maybe more of a traditional AM and PM peak commute time, and operate in 15 minutes during that peak period, one trade-off would be you could no longer operate weekend service. And so there are obviously implications for no more weekend service, but having more frequent service during the commute period where perhaps more people are attempting to travel. Another trade-off is to look at serving more trips during the midday or maybe the nighttime period, the quote off-peak period. And so this option shows if you reduced service, increase service in the off-peak period to 30 minutes, you wouldn't necessarily get to increase service in the peak period like we showed with that previous example. So again, serving different travel markets, different objectives with this particular trade-off. And then one kind of speaking to the combination of route alignment, coverage, frequency. What this looks at is reorienting where the route actually serves. So you can kind of see that almost diversion section in the midpoint of the route. If you remove that particular diversion, which obviously takes the route closer to certain households and jobs on that portion on the west end. If you remove that and kind of straightened out the alignment, so it was running mostly along that north-south arterial, now you could provide more frequent service both in the peak period, off-peak, and the weekend. But you can see the implication. Fewer people, fewer jobs are within a walking distance. So again, there's trade-offs where perhaps having more frequent service may increase ridership more than the lost coverage for that route alignment. And before I kind of been throwing a lot out you, I thought I would just pause here just on kind of transit fundamentals before I get into some other topics.
I don't see anyone with a light on.
Okay.
So you're good to go.
There's no quiz at the end, so don't worry. So kind of thinking through transit fundamentals and then what that means, if we were to consider a local transit system. Those fundamentals that I talked about would all have to be folded into your decision-making process. And part of that would start with a comprehensive plan, the policy framework, really understanding what are your objectives for a transit system within the city? Who are you trying to serve? What are those travel markets? And from there, it would lead into what is the actual implication and implementation plan to operate that service. There are obviously significant costs with operating any sort of transit system, both from the capital and the operating costs. You need, obviously, a base to store those vehicles when they aren't running, maintain those vehicles. And that fifth bullet on the decisions, service coverage, the frequencies, there's typically a lot of time and resources that go into trying to identify what those travel markets are, how best to serve those markets. And so that's all an element in providing a specific local type of transit system. We recently wrapped up working with Everett Transit, which is a city-based transit system that has been in place for some time, and they're going through all of these questions, addressing all of these needs to think through how best to serve their community with their own particular transit system. And it comes with substantial costs, but there are trade-offs, obviously, in having some control over those decisions. So stepping out a little bit and looking more regionally about agency plans and what those plans mean for the city of Sammamish. King County Metro a few years ago wrapped up their long-range plan, Metro Connects, that really looks at two key milestones, a system-wide expansion by 2025 and another expansion by 2040, but really rolling those expanded services out throughout every single year, particularly trying to integrate more with Sound Transit investments as those investments come online. Sound Transit, you're likely familiar with ST2 and ST3. The express bus revisions that are currently underway, getting planned for 2021 and 2025, really to integrate with a lot of those Link Light Rail investments that are coming online by those same years. The North Sammamish Park and Ride, you'll hear a lot more about that later tonight. I-405 BRT operating by 2024 is in its current planning and design phase. East Link Light Rail extended out to Bellevue and into Redmond, also by 2023 and 2024. And then we have the Issaquah South Kirkland Light Rail, which will begin planning in a few years and operate by 2041. Talking a little more specifically about King County Metro and what is their decision-making process when they allocate service, when they identify new needs for service. It really centers on these 5 core elements. So the priority one is on reducing overcrowding. So when there's a route that has standing room for over 20 minutes of a route, they identify that route to try to either increase the hours, increase service along that corridor to help address that overcrowding. And indeed, your particular routes within the city, 216 and 219, have been identified for overcrowding. Similarly, on priority number 2 is on improving reliability, so the on-time performance for service. This looks at any routes that have been late routinely, upwards of 20 to 35% of the time, and identifies service investments, either additional trips or padding in the schedule to try to address that on-time performance. And again, routes 216 and 219 have recently been identified for that service investment. Once Metro identifies those particular priorities and allocates the service that's available to address those issues, they then look at priority number 3, which is on service growth. And service growth looks at those 3 factors listed to the left: land use density, social equity, and connecting centers, to understand what is the almost like the baseline level of service that should be provided along a corridor. Is it 15-minute frequency? Is it 30-minute? Should it operate on the weekends and weekdays? Those factors go into identifying what we call a targeted service rate for a particular corridor. And indeed, the Route 269 has been identified as a priority with King County Metro. But as I mentioned, they have priorities 1 and 2. So priority 3 is a little lower on the funding scale and often has to get passed over until they identify new sources of funds or new vehicles to provide that level of service.
So I would hope that you could probably expand on the 216, 219, and the 269. I think we all up here know exactly what that means, but if for those watching at home and those in the audience, if you can please explain the difference in those service, that would be helpful, I think.
Yeah. So as far as the Route 216 and the 219, the implications for what they're trying to address. So both of those routes have actually suffered from some poor reliability, particularly with I-90, the change in the configuration for the express lanes, changes into downtown. There's what's called the D2 roadway, which used to be a dedicated pathway from I-90 into downtown Seattle. That is now closed with Eastlink construction, so that has also impacted reliability to get into downtown Seattle. Downtown Seattle itself has also seen significant congestion increases, and so those travel times are less reliable. On-time performance has really suffered for those 2 particular routes. And with it's a little bit of a feedback loop. As you have routes that arrive later and later, often those later routes can become more overcrowded, and so then you have to try to invest additional trips to address that overcrowding issue. On Route 269 is a route that runs between Redmond and Issaquah, an all-day type of service. It currently operates at 30-minute frequency, and so as what I mentioned, the priority 3 with the service growth, the Metro has targeted that route for 15-minute frequency, again, once funds and vehicles are available to provide that service. So, any other clarity maybe for...
No, it's just the numbers may be obscure for some of our viewers if they are not bus riders themselves. So thank you.
Yep. And then, so I talked about with the service growth and the 3 factors that go into that. And then priority 4 is looking at route productivity. So in this case, route productivity really is the number of riders that are on a particular vehicle and averaged over the course of an hour. And Metro looks at what are those routes that maybe are in the top 25th percentile of their routes, how are they performing, and what are those routes that are in the bottom 25th percentile. And really that 4th priority is looking at potentially reallocating service to more productive routes, but not necessarily reducing service on those lower routes, lower productivity routes, trying to identify why some of those routes maybe aren't as productive, and is there some other type of service that could better serve those particular corridors. So when we talk about coordination with King County Metro, what we've seen as successes with cities and other agencies looking to partner, one, it's looking to address, infrequent transit access. How can we better improve access to the transit system, either a high capacity transit system or the local system? Parking availability obviously is always an issue with our park and ride lots throughout the region. So cities and with King County Metro look to partner to improve either parking availability, improve wayfinding for reaching parking, overall trying to address some of those constraints that riders typically see when a park and ride lot fills up at 7 a.m., for example. They're also looking at alternatives. Parking is expensive. Are there alternative ways to provide that level of access to a high-capacity transit network without building a heavy capital investment like a parking garage? This relates to improving the non-motorized access. So as more people can walk and bike to transit, that lessens the capital need to help improve that access. And then that last bullet really speaks to some of those priorities that I listed that King County Metro thinks about. So as cities can provide better speed and reliability for transit, what that does is it frees up those hours that a vehicle would normally be sitting in traffic, frees those hours up for more frequent service, maybe more service throughout the course of the day, and overall improvement to the customer experience for riding transit. And these all these actions, really speak to kind of some of the core elements about thinking about efficiency of allocation of service, how that impacts emissions, regional emissions, ensuring equity and access to the system, and then funding. How can cities and Metro think about partnerships and funding to improve overall transit operations? I'll talk a little specifically about some of these examples, successful coordination. And a lot of these all followed a similar track. The cities would go through an overall transportation master planning process, thinking about all modes, thinking about overall vision and objectives for the transportation system, and getting into the details a little bit on transit, but not necessarily thinking through full implementation. It was more of a policy direction to say, here's how we would like to partner with regional transit agencies. Here's how we would like to integrate transit access with our bike and pedestrian modal priorities. And so these cities went through their transportation master planning process, identified those core objectives related to transit, and then they had a follow-on, either a transit master plan, a transit implementation plan. There's a number of different ways you can then carry that forward to think through the specifics for how you would achieve the objectives you've identified in the transportation master plan. The cities themselves, with their transit plans, sometimes it's prioritizing where service should go. Other times it's getting a little more detailed in terms of speed and reliability investments. So identifying what are those hot spots of congestion, what are some potential solutions, and how ultimately can the city fund those in partnership with King County Metro or Sound Transit. And those last two, the Seattle Transportation Benefit District and Everett Transit, are a little standalone, but I wanted to bring those up. Seattle, if you aren't aware, went through a ballot measure actually to fund what initially was going to be service cuts in the city of Seattle. Based on improved revenues, it actually allowed them to fund additional service. So this is a local city of Seattle tax that's helping to fund improved frequency throughout the city and improved service span for those riders. And Everett Transit, I mentioned earlier on, is a local city with their own transit agency, and it does follow from their comprehensive plan and their transportation element. But again, it's operated within the city and really looking at coordination with some of the regional partners such as Community Transit and Sound Transit. So circling this all back to City of Sammamish and the Transportation Master Plan, what are some potential actions really to help improve transit coordination, transit planning, just getting more involved in the transit environment within the region? We mentioned, those relationships with the agencies. That's kind of paramount to helping that process, helping that planning process, and thinking about how you can partner with some of your neighboring jurisdictions. I mentioned the Transportation Master Plan. That's really what drives some of the policy and the objectives for how you think about transit within the city. And I didn't touch on it too much. I know there have been some presentations from King County Metro, and there's some pilot discussions on the Community Connections program. So that is a program to look at if a particular area maybe isn't warranted or in the King County Metro service planning process, they don't define that for a traditional fixed route transit service. Community Connections is a way to really complement the fixed route transit, complement the high capacity transit network to improve access throughout the city. Metro Connects had their technical advisory committee for that long range plan, so continued participation in the implementation of the long range plan would be warranted. And then PSRC is going through their Vision 2050, so their land use and transportation plan for 2050. So really being involved in that process through their various technical advisory committees would be warranted. The membership in the Sound Cities Association, that also helps drive how these agencies think about partnerships and service planning in the region. And then we have the Eastside Transportation Partnership Committee. Again, that helps inform Metro, helps inform Sound Transit, and really helps build good partnerships with your neighboring jurisdictions and the local and regional agencies. So a number of, steps and actions, just to think about. But again, just kind of stepping back to the overall transportation master plan. When you're thinking about modal priorities and how to plan out the network for the city, just think about core fundamentals about transit, how service can be provided, and what are some of those trade-offs that go into providing good service within the city. So that's all I have for now, and happy to take any other questions you may have.
Councilmember Hornish.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. So I just want to confirm a couple of things and ask some questions. When you kind of talked a lot about Metro, we kind of assume Sound Transit does the same type of planning for transit considerations and everything, correct?
That's correct. I walked through in detail kind of the King County Metro service planning process. For example, Sound Transit right now with their express bus network plan, they're going through a similar process to think about for example, Northgate Light Rail and with Eastlink Light Rail. How should they allocate service? What should those frequencies be? What is their coverage? They're going through those same discussions right now.
I was hoping that would be your answer, and I expected it. You had a graph, a slide in here, and I can't remember. It was early in the stage. You had one where you showed the ridership percentages during the day.
They're right
This
there,
one?
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, the max, and I'll call it roughly. You get the peaks at rush hour, if you will, or the peak hours typically, right? Mm-hmm. But we're talking somewhere between 5 and 9% during those time periods. How do you predict that if you're putting in a new route?
So and this particular chart is actually total travel, all modes. But you bring up a great question about ridership forecasting and trying to understand if you put in a new route that connects 2 points that wasn't originally connected, how do you forecast what that would be? There are a number of different steps that either PSRC, King County Metro, Sound Transit, they go through in their ridership forecasting. And it really centers on this household travel survey, which speaks to what is the overall travel demand between 2 points. And then without getting too much into the black box of ridership forecasting, there are inherent kind of travel behavior fundamentals that go into how people decide which mode to take. They weigh things such as their travel time, how long they wait for the bus, parking costs, how long they're actually on the vehicle itself. And there are equations that help to understand what that decision would be given a particular set of factors. So when you put in a new route, then you can understand what is that travel time between points A and B, how fast is that time via personal vehicle, how fast is it biking, walking, and transit. And then there are equations that can speak to, well, what is the probability that someone would then take transit, or what is the probability someone would take a personal vehicle? And that folds into the overall ridership forecast. So then you understand we could expect 600 riders a day based on putting in this type of service. And all of those factors that I talked about, coverage and frequency, folds into those travel behavior equations.
But having a survey back it up.
Exactly.
Too, right?
Yep.
And I don't know if you can remind me, but what was the assumption for ST3 as far as ridership percentage? Do you know?
Ridership percentage isn't like a mode share, or
Yeah, how much of the people commuting would be taking ST3 light
That's a
rail?
great question. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay. Really, where I was going, having spent a fair amount of time outside of Sammamish in a Southern California city, I recently heard a news comment that they said, we predicted this many riders, and they said it's roughly about half of what they predicted. So what I'm curious about is, do you as a consulting firm, or does Metro or Sound Transit go back and recalibrate their assumptions when they're doing that to find out, well, yeah, we assumed this, but it was 50, 60% of what we assumed, or maybe it's greater, maybe it's 120. Do they recalibrate that from time to time as far as being able to predict the ridership?
Yeah, and actually, Sound Transit's ridership model has gone through, it started decades ago, and actually has been going through a number of iterations trying to dial in these factors that I was just talking about, where, we're taking equations that are derived from surveys for how people travel, and that can only be so accurate. So, continuous data, and particularly in the last, 3 to 5 years, we're getting more and more travel data from GPS cell phone services that more accurately represent how people are traveling. So that forecast is getting more and more accurate, and that's that type of information goes back into the models to tweak what are those equations that ultimately drive that. I will say I think that's something that's particularly always isn't as rigorous, kind of a look back of the forecasts, but it is part of the model development process to calibrate based on actual ridership versus the forecast ridership.
So you say it's getting more and more accurate. What's the magnitude of accuracy today versus what it has been? Did it go from missing it by 70 to now missing it by 30%, or?
Yeah, and without putting a specific number, based on the coarseness of some of the survey data from the 90s versus getting this more detailed GPS and cell phone based data, you could say the margin of error was plus or minus 20%, and we're getting closer to plus or minus 5,
That's kind of what I was looking
10%.
for. Better feel. All right.
Roughly that. I think it would be interesting to go back and see exactly what that number looks like, though.
It's helpful. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, in talking with Sound Transit, my understanding is that as the light rail lines come online, King County Metro and Sound Transit will continue to review and update their service routes and where they're providing. Is that your understanding as well? So as they'll be able to take bus routes offline as rail takes over for those, and they're going to look at where to reallocate those as they go. Is that correct?
That's exactly, that is the plan.
Right.
And I think we have some recent examples now to see how that's played out with for example, with the extension of light rail going up to University of Washington, King County Metro and Sound Transit took a look at what routes could be restructured, kind of oriented to serve the station directly, and then take those hours that maybe were getting wasted sitting on I-5, for example, and put in more frequency for those routes that remain. And right now, King County Metro is going through their Northeast Side mobility planning process and thinking about how to better leverage the light rail that's there right now, particularly for some east side routes. They likely will start conducting some of that restructure for Northgate Link, for example, which starts in 2021. I believe by early next year they'll start kind of that outreach process, understanding how people travel, which routes maybe would be more efficient to serve directly with the light rail station. So yeah, that's a process that will go throughout. And for the East Link, for example, that should start up probably in a couple years. And I realize Sound Transit's here, so I won't quote them on what that will be. But
So just if I can restate, so the published bus routes that are out there, that is the plan as of right now, but we know that those are going to be very dynamic because we're going to have rail service coming online, and there will be continuous improvement updates made as that comes online.
That's exactly it.
And while I appreciate Councilmember Hornish's information from Southern California, I think what would be more relevant is if we could ask staff to bring back the actual data, because my understanding about the rail service that has come online, for instance, to University of Washington, that the ridership numbers have far exceeded the expectations, and I see nods coming from Sound Transit in the audience. So again, I appreciate the information from San Diego, but I think what would be far more relevant would be what's happening right here in our region. So Mr. City Manager, if you could either that or when Sound Transit comes up to present, maybe we could get the actual data, what's going on right here in our own region. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions up here from council, so thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the time.
Okay, our next item, is the North Sammamish Park and Ride. We are going to get project status and preliminary site screening results. Mr. City Manager, I think you're turning it right back over to the desk over here.
I'll turn it back over to, excuse me.
Give us one moment as we set up the slideshow here.
I don't want that. I'm pushing buttons everywhere. Okay.
There you go. As long as it's red.
I'm on now, yeah. Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. I'll turn it over to Doug, and he'll get this started for us for our second presentation.
Thank you, Rick. Good evening again. This is the second part of our transit-focused discussion tonight, and this is about the North Sammamish Park and Ride project, which is a project that Sound Transit is leading in partnership with the city. And so without further ado, I will introduce Ariel Taylor, who is a community, sorry, I apologize.
That's okay. My name is Ariel Taylor. I do Eastside Government Relations for Sound Transit. So I'm sure you've seen me here and out in the community, especially at like chambers of commerce, things like that. So I'm usually the interface with the community for the agency on the east side. So without further ado, we are here to talk about the Sound Transit 3 investment here in the city of Sammamish, which is a $20 million allocated project for a park and ride located in the north end of Sammamish. So what we'll cover today is just a really brief high-level reorientation of Sound Transit 3's investment here on the east side, including some of the ST2 investments like East Link Light Rail. And then we'll go ahead and I'll hand it over to my colleagues and they'll get into more of the specifics about the North Sammamish Park and Ride and the project schedule, proposed sites we're looking at, the public process, and then obviously we're here to answer any questions you may have. So just to get you a little bit more oriented, your consultant here before me did an excellent job of an overview of both transit agencies that service King County. So we are the Regional Transit Authority. You might know us via like light rail lines, ST Express bus service, which is usually like long haul bus service from point to point. We also do Sounder commuter trains from Everett to Seattle and then down from Lakewood, also up to Seattle. So we cover about 40% of the state's population between our 3 counties that we serve. That has 52 cities in it and about a little over 1,000 square miles of geography. So here's a better look at what's happening actually here on the east side. So we have a lot of things going on. Number one, you've probably already seen the construction of East Link Light Rail over I-90 and through, I guess, through Bellevue and then down into Redmond via SR 520. That is scheduled to open, at least the section all the way up into Overlake, at 2023. So that's actually coming online fairly quickly as far as capital projects are concerned. The extension of light rail from Overlake to downtown Redmond is scheduled to open in 2024, so 1 year later. After that, we've also got the North Sammamish Park and Ride, which is the first project out of the gate for Sound Transit 3, opening in 2024, in conjunction with that light rail extension to downtown Redmond. We also have a new service for Sound Transit coming online here on the east side, which is Bus Rapid Transit. And that is basically what we like to call light rail on wheels. It's a high-capacity transit service running up and down I-405, mostly in the express toll lanes. And we also have another line servicing SR 522 on the north end of Lake Washington. Both of those are scheduled to also open in 2024. All right, so the North Sammamish Park and Ride, which is what we are here to talk about. This is, like I said, an ST3 early deliverable opening in 2024. The voter-approved package has this as a $20 million project, up to 200 parking stalls, and to be located in the north end of the city of Sammamish. Like I said, this will open in 2024. And with this, I'm going to hand it over to my project manager, Becca Owie, to go through some more of the details.
Good evening. Thanks for having us here tonight. So as Ariel said, my name is Becca Owie. I'm the project manager for the North Sammamish Park and Ride. I'm a project manager for the East Corridor, so I'm also working on downtown Redmond Link Extension, which is the extension to light rail coming from downtown Seattle to Mercer Island, Bellevue, and up to Redmond. And that extension from the so it's going to make its way to Microsoft campus in 2023. And then in 2024, that final leg of Eastlink will go from Microsoft to downtown Redmond via Marymore Park. And that station at Marymore Park will be your closest light rail station, just a few miles north. So here's a look at the schedule for the Park and Ride. We're at the beginning. We just launched planning last year. We will move into design in 2021. Construction will take roughly a year in 23, and then we open in 24. So here's a close-up look at what we call the preliminary engineering phase, which is what we've just begun. That is the phase where we look at sites, we evaluate sites, and select a site. That's where we're at right now. Then we move into conceptual engineering, which is taking the design to roughly 10 to 15% design. And then at that point, you can begin environmental review, and then preliminary engineering. The completion of that takes the design to about 30%. And this is the body of work we're engaged in and hope to have finished by 2021. So just a little bit of a zoom in on what that looks like for this year and the coming couple of years. We are solidly in the middle of our phase 1 preliminary engineering, which is site identification, screening, and selection. We hope to have a preferred site identified by the end of the summer, and we'll be coming back to you later, and Ariel will get to that at the end of our presentation where we expect to engage with the council in the coming months. And then at the end of this year, once we have our site, we'll look at what the best way to deliver that. What is the best project delivery method? Is it design build, design bid build, public-private partnership? It all depends on what the site is that we select. In 2020, we'll work on partnering agreements with, as necessary, with the city, potential private partners, potentially King County Metro. Again, the site will dictate what those agreements might look like. Next year, we'll also launch our phase 2 and 3 of preliminary engineering. So once we have our site, we can do the environmental review. We can take our design up to about 30% and begin acquiring whatever property rights are deemed necessary. And then in 2021, that's when we begin our environmental permitting and scope and launch the final design phase. So we began by looking at a project area defined here on your map. The blue crosshatch area is the area we look to identify sites to analyze. This is because the 4 routes that go through Sammamish, which are the 216, 219, 269, the 554, which is the One Sound Transit route, they all run on the 228th Sahalliway corridor. And so therefore, the Park and Ride needs to be located as close as possible to 228th so we can provide easy access for autos and pedestrians. We also have to locate this Park and Ride within the voter taxing district, which is what we call the RTA boundary, the Regional Transit Authority boundary. The red line that's sort of on the northeast of the map is the RTA boundary. So it just so happens that Sammamish sits on the eastern edge of our boundary, and it doesn't entirely capture the entire city. However, this project is really meant to serve the city of Sammamish residents. We were here at the end of February 19th, I think it was. I was on vacation, so couldn't make that. But I believe you heard about our screening criteria and had a presentation from Sound Transit. We looked at, again, we need to be on or very near the existing transit corridor within the boundary of the RTA zone. We need to make sure whatever site we analyze had compatible zoning or wouldn't be too difficult to adjust zoning if necessary. We want it to be a safe and easy and convenient customer experience, so the autos and pedestrians need safe access. Environmental considerations are very important. We want to minimize impacts to the natural environment. And we also want to minimize impacts to existing residents or existing uses on the sites. We really want to avoid displacements and potential relocations. We are looking to deliver multiple public benefit if possible. Yes, we have funding to do a park and ride, but if we could invest in a park and ride that also delivers other benefits, that's even better. An example might be an area that could, where you could develop transit-oriented development or affordable housing, or maybe a park could be wrapped into the parcel, or things like that. So, or maybe it could deliver upon city objectives besides parking or in addition to parking. And then we mentioned our 2024 project delivery year. That is very, very important and a key driver for this project. It is a voter mandate that we deliver this by 2024. So whatever site we select needs to be feasible and support on-time project delivery. So a little bit about our screening process. In Sound Transit lingo, we often refer to our site screening in phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. So I just want to go over that and what each phase is exactly. Last fall, we started our screening and we worked with the city to identify sites in our project area boundary. We found about 15 sites to analyze. And what we did is we looked at these 15 sites and see if they met essential project requirements. The site must accommodate up to 200 stalls. We don't want to impact environmentally critical areas to such an extent that we couldn't mitigate or afford to mitigate, things like that. And once we went through that screening, 5 sites advanced. And this is a very difficult map to read, so I apologize. But that shows all 15 sites we looked at, and then the 5 pinks, which we'll zoom in on in a minute, are the 5 sites that carried forward into the next level screening, level 2.
So if I can just clarify, so on the slide it says that the 5 are in blue, but that's actually reversed, correct? That there were 9 sites in blue, or 10 sites in blue.
You are correct.
The 5
I'm
pink
sorry.
ones. Okay,
Yes,
that's right. I just want to make sure
yes.
that
Wondering that same thing.
Exactly. Sorry about that. Nice catch.
Okay.
So, is this still working? Yes, it is. So then the last few months we've been engaged in level 2 screening. So this is where we take a more rigorous look with all of the criteria that we have, and we developed measures, and again in partnership with King County Metro and the city, to try to measure how well each of these 5 sites is meeting the various criteria. And we went through a scoring exercise, and that we're going to present some of the key advantages and disadvantages of those 5 sites in just a moment. And after we receive feedback from City Council, from you, from the public, we will then propose a short list of 2 to 4 sites to advance into final screening during the latter part of the summer. So level 3 screening on the 2 to 4 sites, the short list, which we hope to identify in the coming couple weeks, we'll look at really a focus on cost, not just construction costs, but operations and maintenance, the cost to mitigate environmental impacts, the cost to relocate or mitigate displacements, things like that. And then, of course, schedule, risk, and feasibility of delivering by 2024. And then at the end of the summer, hopefully, we will have our preferred site. That is the goal. So here's a look at the 5 sites that carried forward. The 1 through 5 is going from south to north, and that's the order we will present these sites. The first site is, that's weird, I didn't touch anything, it wants to go. So the first site at the southern boundary there is your next door neighbor, right here on the corner, JCL Properties at the corner of Southeast 8th and 228th. This is a privately owned property. And the second site is just a little bit to the north in the future town center zone. I'm sorry, the JCL property is also in the town center zone. The next property to the north is a parcel that is going to be developed by the developer STCA, and this is at 4th and about 224th Place Southeast, right behind the Met Market. The third site is Central Washington University. I'm sure you're all familiar with that site, and that is our largest site, and I'll say that is the only site on the table that would actually could accommodate us up to 200 surface spaces. I guess I should take a moment just to say that is the only site, and so the rest of the sites would have to be structured, either because constraints of the size or because of the zoning code. The fourth site is where the current Boys and Girls Club is located. This is as is the Central Washington University site, is city-owned. So we're looking at part of that property. So there's a building there today with the current programming, and then there's a parking lot. And so we're looking at that parking lot area. And then the final site on the table is what we're calling the stormwater site. It's up at 228th and Northeast 12th Place. You may recall it's just a blank piece of land that has some storm ponds, and this is another city-owned site, and it's a stormwater retention facility. And it's adjacent to a residential area up the hill. And Juan Calaf, my colleague, is going to give more details on each site, and then we'll entertain your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Becca. Hi, my name is Juan Calaf. I'm a senior land use planner with Sound Transit, and I'm just going to take a little deeper dive into describe each site and some of the advantages and disadvantages that we see at the moment that we were doing our level 2 analysis. We have identified, essentially, in a nutshell, there's 3 sites that are publicly owned by the city at this time, and 2 sites that are privately owned. So starting with JCL property, it's a private site located right here north of City Hall. It's about approximately 5 acres. It has a lot of amenities nearby, which we think it's great, and also the potential for having some shared parking uses, given that it would require parking garage within mixed-use environment for the town center. We also believe that there would be no displacement. This is essentially a green field right now, and it would be also good for pedestrians and vehicular access. Also, on the flip side, some of the disadvantages we see, there's some potential environmentally critical areas that had to do with the nearby wetland buffers, and also some erosions zones. So that's something to consider. Also, we think that the location is being the furthest most south is a disadvantage itself, because the south park and ride location is just about a mile and a little bit more away. So we want to space those out as far as we can. We also believe that the cost for acquiring this piece of property would probably be larger than the other ones that we looked at. So this is all relative to the ones that we've been looking at. That's why we say higher. The second site that we looked at is the Sammamish Town Center property that is part of the STCA portfolio. This came through us through a request for expressions of interest that was put out in the community for anybody who wanted to respond earlier this year, and the only response we got was from STCA, and we met with them, and they essentially provided this location for the property. This is just west of the Sky Sammamish development, and it's located around 1,000 feet walk up from the 228 transit corridor. We believe that it's also advantageous to have, it's an advantageous site in the sense that it has many community amenities, and from what's been planned for the town center, it shows like it would be a location in a desirable area. It's also potentially a location that would create some shared parking uses, given the requirements for town center developments. We don't see any displacement in the current uses right now, and some of the disadvantages would be there is currently steep access from the transit corridor from where the bus stop, nearest bus stop is, to where the park and ride would be. So that would be a difficult for non-motorized pedestrian access to be achieved there. Also, it's going to be important to have the STCA's development timeline align with our project delivery. So we want to have the project delivered to the city of Sammamish before the end of 2024, and we want to make sure that if we're partnering with someone to deliver this project, development entity, it has to align with that process. And right now, there's also some environmentally critical areas mapped that are of concern. And also, this is just a little bit up from the previous property, so it's pretty relatively south on the scale of our sites. It's in the south spectrum, so it's also potentially a higher acquisition property, and the city has identified that they also have planned a green spine as part of the town center development that may go near that site. So we didn't go fully into understanding that, but we know that there will be some potential impacts from having that green spine there. Next site.
I have some questions if you could go back to that one. Deputy Mayor Moran.
My question on this one has to do a little bit with location. I'm just trying to envision location on this. Is this right at the top of that hill when you hit 4th?
Further back slightly. That's the Sky Apartments in the bottom right corner.
It's just at the top of the hill, just west of the Sky Sammamish Apartments.
Okay. So, okay. I mean,
It's flattened out, but...
I mean, my only concern with it being there, and I'm just going to, is... I mean, I love the location, except I have that concern about the fact that that road that we just had this last winter was just with snow or ice or anything. That's a problem.
Okay. Councilmember Stewart?
Sure, if we're going to take questions. I have a couple questions on it. First of all, I had envisioned, and maybe I'm incorrect, but I would think as a city, if we're going to have a park and ride, we do not want the buses stopping on 228th to load and unload. We would want it like our other park and ride, where the buses would at least come off slightly. And it's my understanding that King County Metro is willing to go at least up to a quarter of a mile off of 228th, because if you've got, a bus full of people unloading, you're going to block our main north-south corridor. So I think the steepness, to Deputy Mayor Moran's concern, would be for buses, not for pedestrians. Would that be accurate?
Yes. So this is, can you hear me? Anybody?
No.
Okay. Yes?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
No.
You got it.
Okay.
Push the button. There.
Testing.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
there we
working.
go. So, hi, I'm Ariel again. So we have been in conversations with both STCA about this particular issue, right, of servicing something at the top of the hill. So we have brought in both STCA and Metro to talk about what those connections might look like in the future. So that is something we are exploring with our partner on how to connect bus service if the park and ride was to be at Town Center and at this location. So it's something that we'll talk about as far as future service serving the park and ride.
And then I guess I'd like to get a little bit more information about how this might conflict with the green spine. So I'd like to hear more from the city staff what that conflict would be.
Yeah, so I can take a stab at that. So dating back to the original adoption of the town center plan back in 2007-8 timeframe, the city had envisioned a linear park, kind of a nice grand promenade through the middle of town center. And the southern terminus of that would be the Lower Commons Park. and extending north. And the city has included those designs in an infrastructure plan as well as the sub-area plan and a few other documents. And generally speaking, it goes kind of along that parcel line, the western parcel line, the property that is being looked at right here, meaning that there would be some sort of dedication on either side of that line for the park if a development were to go through.
So I'm sorry, I appreciate all that explanation. So is this parcel, so any part of this parcel supposed to be part of the green spine?
The western portion, correct.
How much of that is supposed to be?
It depends on the design,
Okay.
but generally speaking, just with a broad brush, it's 120 feet from edge to edge, so roughly 60 feet of the western portion of that
Okay.
parcel.
And is that something that we think we can either design around or design around the parking structure to accommodate that? Or is it we'd have to move the green spine? Have we researched that yet? Do we know anything more about that?
Nothing in specific, but I think that would be a consideration for sure, is if once there's a proposal, what does that look like? How does that work with the green spine? And that'd be including our parks department, including our development, community development department, and all the other stakeholders involved.
And then in terms of, other things like high acquisition costs, again, I was kind of envisioning that this would be something where we would have the ability to sort of partner between the city, whomever provides land, if we could, and the authorities to try to work out so that, it could be multi-use. And I think that speaks to one of your other goals, which is that there are additional benefits other than just a parking structure for commuters. And so is this, high acquisition cost, is this sort of just a preliminary thing because we're still in early negotiations? Because I would think that there are ways we could negotiate around cash.
I think this is just based on relative to the sites that we've looked at without having negotiations and speaking other conversations that we'll have in level 3 to refine that.
So all these questions, if this site were to be selected to go on to the next level, we could explore those further and determine if there are, because, I think, in my mind, the big question around whether to site it this centrally in the town center or not is whether that's really where, we took a vote as a council 7-0 that said we want a transit center in our town center. And so, is that a good idea? Is that feasible? I think it is a consideration, right? So when we put together that MOU with STCA, we all said we really want a transit center there. I think what we'd be looking to the transit authorities to come back and tell us is, is this a good place if that is what we want, a transit center in our town center? Is this a good place to do that? So, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, touching on a couple of points
Your mic's
that
not on.
Councilmember Stewart.
Let's do it.
Mike.
Mike, please. Thanks.
Touching on some of the points that Councilmember Stewart had talked about, dealing with our desire to want to have it in the town center if it's feasible. One of the things that is not cited under the advantages but was mentioned in the earlier presentation on the land use density that deals with fixed route transit needs a critical mass of travel throughout the day and high densities to support the services, and obviously that's the area that would happen. So I would expect that should be on your advantage list that's not being cited, since that was the first one to come out. The second one, going to the point that Councilmember Stewart had talked about, the higher acquisition costs. At least to citizens, there have been discussions at the Rotary and other clubs that they've gone to that they were looking at, and actually, I believe even here in the council, on a public-private partnerships, not just for the acquisition costs for the land, but there had been some talk here when Metro came in about, because of their Brookdale Village model where they have worked with Uber and other public transport, so that also could be a public-private discussion, and so hopefully you'll follow up with them directly. My third pointer, and this one is a question, the earlier one you had mentioned had wetlands. This one you said contains environmentally critical areas. What critical areas are there, and can they be built upon or worked around?
Thank you for the question. That's a good point to clarify. So to the southeast of that parcel is what's called a critical aquifer recharge area. I believe it's a class 2, otherwise known as a CARA. That has been identified. So through the development review process, all of that would need to be identified, delineated, and then there would be a review process through the community development department about what the setbacks are, what kinds of mitigations would be required to ensure minimal impacts to the critical area.
But that's more readily workable, and while we want to respect the aquifer always, of course, and we're sensitive to on that versus some of the other critical areas as we've classified them in our city. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hornish.
Do you have any feeling yet for how many levels you would need to build up to get 200 parking spots?
I would say that we haven't run that exercise, but we're about to do it. We're just using the standard 350 square foot per stall, and then we would try, in this case, we would try to understand where the access points are at first and see what kind of ramping we can do. But I'm pretty confident that it would be no more than 3 floors.
Two more, okay. Yeah. Just to weigh in, I have some real concerns about if we keep the green spine in the same place. The green spine was supposed to be a nice, welcoming, open area, and we have a 3-level concrete stall.
Right.
I'm not sure that's what we had in mind for the town center, or for the green spine anyhow, so, okay.
I believe there would be facade treatments for adjacent building facades along the green spine, so there could be ways to address the pedestrian experience.
Give me a little more of that, or explain that a little more.
In the town center code, there are design guidelines built into the code that require, in certain situations, for instance, if there is a building that is adjacent to the green spine with a facade along that green spine, that there would be ways for the city to require treatments of that facade too.
No, I appreciate the facade, so it doesn't just look like 3 levels, but my concern is being so high, it takes away a lot of the light that we were, I think the concept was to have on the green spine to be more of a nice, open, welcoming area.
Yeah.
'Cause it's going to block the light out even if you put another facade on it.
I think
that's a good
if it's located, if I may mention, if it's located north of the site and then your spine is effectively to the west, there wouldn't be such a substantial shadow effect. But that has to be studied. And right now I understand the spine running north-south.
All right.
So I have a few more questions. First is, who owns the parcel right in front there? Because if we're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, the 60 feet on the western edge is supposed to be the green spine. That looks to be greater than that parcel itself. So, we're either cutting into the green spine or we're going to have to find a different access point. So does STCA also own the parcel right in front of that?
That is a separate property owner.
Okay.
And you are correct that access would most likely be off of 225th.
Okay. So I want to circle back on your first disadvantage, because we've talked about buses going up there, but that bullet point doesn't insinuate a bus going up Southeast 4th. It insinuates that the pedestrians will be walking to the bus. So I want to understand from Sound Transit, if your vision is mirroring what I heard up here in terms of buses going up and down Southeast 4th and coming off of 228th, or if your assumption is the bus will stop on 228th, and because what I'm reading here is pedestrians are going to have to walk down to the bus on 228th.
So to clarify, how we are judging where we say 1,000-foot walk to the existing transit corridor. So right now, 228th is the existing transit corridor.
Okay.
And any deviation provided by Metro or Sound Transit would likely come at a full build-out of the town center. So if this park and ride was to be located at this site, and the town center is not fully built out, there likely would not be transit connections serving the park and ride at that point.
Okay, so people would need to walk down to 228th. Okay.
I'm sorry, could she elaborate on why, if you don't mind?
So it's usually based off of density and how many riders we're attracting from a certain area. It's not to say that we couldn't service the transit, the park and ride up the hill at that point. It's based off of the models which the consultant was talking about earlier, if that makes more sense.
But once the town center is built out, would it be?
Yes, depending on the amount of attraction that was,
fair enough. Okay.
drawn from all of the different uses.
Hold on. So I think my concern with the fact that this isn't on 228th, and I appreciate Councilmember Stewart's consideration for not hanging up traffic in one lane and creating an issue with people trying to get around a bus that is stopped in a travel lane. However, if at some point in the future at build out, we have buses then coming up that hill, I think Deputy Mayor Moran touched on this, which is we shut that road down last year. Cars couldn't move up and down it, let alone a bus, even with chains on. So I do have concerns about the hill and the grade that's on it. Do we know what the percentage of grade is on that road? And is there a threshold to which Sound Transit and or King County Metro has for that prevents them from going up and down a hill?
So we also do have snow routes
That's what we
when things
call the
get bad.
Okay.
In my own neighborhood, I have to walk a fair bit to get to my own snow route.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yes, our buses do not travel up and down an icy road that would endanger not only the bus riders, but the people on the street.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So they change in an event, in a weather event, they change how, okay. Gotcha. Good.
I would like to clarify one thing that Ariel said about whether or not bus transit service would deviate up that route. Just to clarify, we don't know if in full build out a deviation is warranted. I think maybe there's a little
Okay, so it may not come up the hill at all.
It may not come up the hill at all. Now, Metro has a formula that they use to analyze whether deviation is warranted. And they haven't done that exercise to do that, but that is probably a next step.
Okay. Well, I think back to what Councilmember Stewart said, I have a concern then too with buses stopping right there because, peak hour, PM peak hour, the traffic is stacked up all the way down to Southeast 4th. And sometimes you can get through the intersection as a vehicle, sometimes not. If you tie up an entire lane with a bus that's stopped, it's going to exacerbate that problem. So it's just something to be mindful of. Councilmember Stewart.
Sorry, just to ask in general, not specific to this site, but the whole concept that we're going to have a park and ride and the buses are not going to pull off at 228th, that for me is just bothersome, period. Let's just take the fact that you have people on the other side of our 4-lane road who need to get there. So the park and ride's only going to be on one side of 228th, but you're going to have people having to catch a bus, get on or off a bus on the other side of the street. So that to me just seems not workable and broken for our city, period. So I don't know how we, is there I hear you say there's a formula with King County Metro, but I think we need to take a note that we need to be working with King County Metro that no matter what, just like the South Park and Ride, the buses pull into the Park and Ride and they are not on 228th for any site.
So at this time, King County Metro is saying they wouldn't do that because there's not high enough ridership on these routes that the added minutes that you add to the travel time to go off and turn in and go back out again it doesn't warrant them going off because you add a couple of minutes to your travel time and already ridership is low in current days and today. So that's why King County Metro has taken a pretty strong position on that right now.
I guess I'd like to ask, the council and our staff that we just kind of take a note on that and that we have some conversations with King County Metro because I think ridership is low because they took away our direct bus service, not because of a minute or two. And that, right? So if we had routes that were serving what people needed in a timely fashion, we would have our standing room only buses like we had in the past. So I think we can have those conversations. And I really do think it's just, I think we just need to take a note on that and that we need to work that no matter what. We have it in the South End Park and Ride, and I think that given the number of roads we have for our commuters in the city, I just don't see that being a feasible solution.
Councilmember, sorry, go ahead.
So we were definitely looking at sites, and as we're scoring and evaluating, the sites that have existing traffic signals, for example, will score better because of that access issue across the street, or where we can create a safe crossing as part of the project. So that's what we've been looking at so far.
Councilmember Ross?
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. And what does concern me is even currently we're getting a lot of leakage where riders are driving to Redmond or Issaquah to take the bus to get direct routes to Seattle, more efficient routes. And I'm concerned that due to the ridership in Sammamish both today and tomorrow, that may be a low utilization park and ride because people will determine I'm much better off just keep going or going each side of Sammamish to get the bus. And what really concerns me is that we're paving sensitive areas or green spines for a white elephant. I just really am concerned. So I want more information and study about what kind of risk are we taking. We're really rolling the dice on our environmental protected areas, our green spine, and it really concerns me. So that's something that we want to be careful that we don't create an underutilized lot at the expense of our green areas in Sammamish.
Deputy Mayor Moran?
Do you have the numbers of what the ridership numbers are today?
For Sammamish?
Correct.
I do not have them, but I can get them for you.
And then do you have the numbers of what the ridership numbers were when we had the direct route?
That would be something I could also find out.
I would like to have those numbers.
So would be good.
Thank you.
Good point.
Councilmember Ritchie?
Forgive me if these questions were already asked when I had to step out. Two quick questions. One is the proposed park and ride as part of ST3.
Sure.
Will it be utilized by only Sound Transit vehicles, or can it also be utilized by, I don't know, King County Metro, and even maybe Microsoft connector, an Amazon connector, some other vehicle, some private or?
It is not a one service fits all. So anybody who would like to use Spark and Ride in order to access any sort of transit is welcome to use.
So other transit agencies can schedule stops there. Okay, good to know. The other part that I kind of is interesting is just kind of taking a look at what you proposed here. It's $20 million, all phases, all inclusive. Well, that's kind of fun, right? I mean, as a contractor, I don't think you ever say that, right? That's it's an interesting thing to say, right?
Very true. It's a very unique project for Sound Transit in that regard, too.
Because that does not include acquisition. So it does include acquisition.
Acquisition in there.
Okay, so we're all inclusive means acquisition. It means a 20, however many, a 200 piece lot, 200 up to 200. That area, talking about taking up a lot of green space and paving over impermeable surfaces versus going up. So if the property acquisition cost takes up 50% of your, or $10 million, or just pick a number, then we're only going to get $10 million worth of parking spaces. And that is, I would assume, it costs more to build up than it does to just lay pavement and call it good and paint some stripes on it and say, see ya, right? Okay, so from your perspective, I guess the question I have is, as you're citing, there's a lot of variables in there, right? So I would imagine that we would want something that is, and I'm speaking for myself here, so I'd want something that is vertical, because it is, to me, less of a footprint in terms of impermeable surfaces. I would think that, at least for me, I would want to have something that is cheaper on we want more spots, more parking spots, more bang for our buck, right? So if there's a partnership that could be established with another group, private or public, that allows us to purchase it as part of another development agreement. Hey, city, put in a park, we're going to give you this, and then in exchange for that, you get more space. I don't know what that looks like, but that's part of the negotiation. I guess my question is, how do you do that? Who's doing that negotiation? Is that what you guys are doing?
So yes, as we're going through these 5 sites, which you're all looking about today, and I'm loving the feedback you're giving us, by the way, this is fantastic. This is exactly what we want to hear, we will take, all of this feedback, and as we go through weaning down our sites into more narrow focus on which ones are the most viable for the community, we will absolutely be looking at partnerships either with the city or with a private entity in order to deliver this project. There is always the opportunity for Sound Transit to do it alone, but you are right that there is leverage opportunity.
Just to follow on to that real quick, is it fair to say that as you develop these sites, you're looking for those partnerships. I mean, let me back up and ask a different question. If you had a blank slate, if you had, you know, if the area to build in was flat and you had no other environmental encumbrances and it was just good to go out to build on, right? Great scenario. What does it cost to put in 200 parking spots on a flat surface without those other environmental costs and without those other, do you have any idea? What are we talking about per spot?
We have not run that exercise, but we are going to be running them based on the sites that we're carrying forward, because as you very well said, there is the ideal scenario, tabula rasa, there's nothing there and you build it. But that's not what we have in any of these cases. So I think we just have to be really specific at what the site's constraints are, which I think every site does have a little bit of constraints. And for example, this town center, you have to do a garage because that's part of the zoning for the town center. So it's not going to be a surface lot.
Yeah. It would have to be vertical.
It would have to be vertical.
Ramps and all that, okay.
And wrapped into a mixed-use context.
Gotcha.
In the town center sites.
Well, 3 of the 5, you said, right?
2.
The town center requires the structured parking. The others don't, but the site constraints lead that to the solution.
Okay, but only one of the sites, I think it says Central Washington, was the only one that has like the footprint available for surface-only lot.
Right, that's correct, and that's the next site that we'll be presenting.
We're not there yet. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Hornish.
Yeah, I want to better understand a little bit of how you came up with the 5 and the pros and cons and everything. So can you kind of explain to me who you've had discussions with concerning these sites? I assume you've been talking with staff, right? I hope. Have you been talking with any of us on the council?
Yes, we've had meetings with those who have been interested. So we've also went to the Sammamish Chamber of Commerce, where I think most of you, or a lot of you, were there, and briefed our first initial sort of sweep through, this is the area we're looking at. So we've not only met with city staff, and they've done an excellent job of identifying sites here in the city that would be a benefit for the community. We've also met with a couple different developers, as well as Central Washington and the Boys and Girls Club.
Okay, good. Has there been any conflicts with those discussions, with one person saying one thing and another person saying another as representative of the city of Sammamish?
I wouldn't say like in conflict. I think that we're still so early in the process that there is, like, oh, so many ideas of what we could do and where we could put it. So I wouldn't say that there's a direct conflict between any.
It's just spitballing ideas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it surprise you to say if one of my fellow council members said, we're ready to build it in the town center, all we need to do is allow it to happen? Would that surprise you? I mean, is it true? I mean, that's what I'm trying to find out. If some people have had discussions, have you had a discussion that somehow says with a council member?
We have not had a discussion that there's an absolute location for this park and ride.
And nor that the town center is the place for it to be and it's ready to go in. Is that correct?
No, we have not had any definitive discussion about where this will go.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, well, first of all, that's a great plug for the Sammamish Chambers lunches that people should attend out there, so I want to thank you for that. The other thing I wanted, going back to Councilmember Ritchie's comments, that ideally, one of the problems I have with ever going to Redmond is that parking spot are so limited and fill up so early that when I have to go to meet for Sound Cities in Seattle, even at 6:30 in the morning, they're gone. I have to make arrangements to park at Redmond City Hall because it's packed out. So one of the things that we want to be building here, and if you only have $20 million and it includes all-inclusive, is how do we get the most amount of parking spots so that in day one it's not already undersized? And that would be an interesting one to be able to get. What do you think is the optimal number that we should be targeting here in Sammamish to at least last us 5+ years at a minimum to go through? So when we start to look at this, as Councilmember Ritchie said, is we can look and see, hey, are there other partnerships, whether it's Metro, whether it's Amazon or Google or Microsoft or whoever else that could come in, as well as the public-private part to continue to enhance it. So I'd be interested if we could get your feel as to what would be the optimal number, and then we can play with both sets, your limitations as well as what we should do so that we're not undersized from day one. Thank you.
So Councilmember Ross, I'm going to let you have the last word because we haven't even gotten to all the rest of the sites yet, and I'd like Sound Transit to be able to get there too. So Councilmember Ross.
Okay, this is what, the third one? I have a lot of them. It feels like there's a lot of, there needs to be a give and take in partnerships, and I feel like there's a lot of give on the city side. So I would challenge anytime we're working with a partner, in this case STCA, that we have serious conversations how to mitigate some of these disadvantages.
Okay, so the next site.
Okay, thank you. So the next site is the Central Washington University, which is just up the road along 228, and this is also a city-owned site. It's a very large site. It's about 23 acres, and it's mostly impacted by wetlands, with the exception of the area, the mid portion of to the west of the site. It has, in particular, two areas that are essentially grassy flat areas in front of the CWU building, which essentially could accommodate a surface parking solution. This is the only site that we are carrying forward that would present the option to have surface parking solution. It also has potential for shared parking if it were to build as a structured garage and in conjunction with sharing uses with the current tenant, which is CWU, and there's also already a Microsoft connector parking on the north of the property there. So that's also some good synergy, and there wouldn't be any anticipated displacement of current uses. We think it's also good pedestrian access and also good vehicular access throughout the site. The major disadvantage is the wetlands issue. There's some drainage issues along the site, some ponding issues, and the other is that it's going to require some coordination with multiple parties, having the tenant, the city, and a sublease scenario. So I think that's what we're anticipating for now. Any questions on this one?
Yep, we've got some questions. Councilmember Valderrama. Oh, you took it on and you took it off. Are you going or not?
Okay, so I go.
Go ahead.
On the disadvantages, one of the issues that we haven't talked about is Central Washington University by the past council was brought in, and one of the major attractions to it is to keep kids here in our city. It's Running Start is their major feature here. They've been going gangbusters. They've been tripling the numbers of enrollment each year. So at this rate, within 2 years, they'll have another 300 or 400 kids attending that school, which is taking those cars off our roads. And they will either need those parking spots, or they will need those parking spots plus another building to go through, which is continuing to take commuters off of leaving our city, going to Bellevue College or Lake Washington Institute. So there is a disadvantage here that it would be counteracting what we had allocated that land for the purpose to, if because of the success that it's having, that it would suddenly put a brake on what we were trying to encourage, is that kids stay here in Sammamish and not be driving off. So I just want to make sure that that's incorporated into one of the disadvantages that's taking place here.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
I think she was going to address that.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to that because we were fortunate enough to meet with both the city and CWU.
It is on. I think you just need to hold it a little
sorry
closer.
about that. I appreciate the comment, and that's great that their programming is so successful. So we had the great opportunity to meet with them just last week, was it? Along with city staff. And we talked about, this opportunity, and they told us about their programming and the growth. And the great thing about the site, because it is so large, it actually could accommodate a shared parking solution. And they mentioned their need for parking, and they thought, this could be a good opportunity to deliver that parking for their students that could be shared with the park and ride. I believe that there's enough flexibility on that site that you could even leave available land for future buildings. Obviously, we'd have to look more deeply into that in the level 3 screening. But we believe that there's ample opportunity and flexibility at that site to accommodate needs of CW as well.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
I was going to say that, I was going to have that put on the plus list, was that they could be a partner for doing a shared parking structure. So I kind of wanted to see that. And I also, that site has been used even before the college got there. There was a big old church that was there, and then that church left. It's been used for parking for a very long time. So it's kind of been known for a place for people to park their cars for carpool and stuff. So it's, I think it's a great location from that standpoint, and it seems to be a location that people like to use because of the fact that it's right on that route.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, so one thing I'm just realizing going through this again is that I guess I kind of wish that we could see sort of the set of criteria where you came up with advantages, disadvantages, because I see potential for shared parking, which again, I think is a great advantage. But I think there's potential for shared parking potentially at other sites, right? And it wasn't necessarily listed. So I'm kind of feeling like we don't necessarily have the same sort of, there's, the 10 criteria, and is it a pro or a con for each site so that we can see consistently sort of what that score looks like. I don't know if I didn't see a summary sheet when I went through this before to kind of summarize all that, but I feel like that's a little bit missing maybe.
So we're finalizing the scoring document, and we're happy to share that with you in the very near future. The potential for shared parking has been listed on the 3 sites we've looked at so far. And you're right, it's been a potential on almost all of these sites, I think, except for maybe 1.
Because I guess that just visually would help me kind of be like, here are the 10 things, and it's either sort of a check or an X or something like that for each of the sites.
Absolutely, and we are scheduled, well, theoretically, we are scheduled to come back to you later this year with the shorter list of sites, and so we're happy to format that in a more digestible way.
And then in terms of the other concern would be, right, impacts to the environment. So I'm assuming at this stage you haven't done any deeper analysis. You just know that there is potential impacts with this one, and actually all 3 of them so far have had impacts to the environment. So we don't really know which one has a greater or lesser, do we? Not yet. Okay. So that I guess that'll come once we have a shorter list and you go to the next level. Okay, thank you.
I'm trying to get a feel for where the north end of the town center area, sub-area is. Is it stop at Main, or does it go north of Main?
It stops at Main. The Central Washington University site is just on the other side of the town center.
Okay, but catty-cornered, you could get there. So, I mean, in some regards, it's almost within walking distance if you have a lot of apartment or dwelling units in the north end of the town center. They could walk about the same distance that it would take if it was sited on Southeast 4th, 225th? Or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, that could be a good solution, it seems. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was thinking that. Thank you.
So I was glad to hear that you are talking with Central Washington University and that they've shared, I think what Councilmember Valderrama has stated, if they're tripling their numbers every year, I would think there'd be a very similar opportunity on this site. It was discussed for the STCA site, which is a partnership opportunity with Central Washington University. And you may not necessarily have to do a surface lot here. So I hope you're looking at it more than just, wow, we got this big flat piece of land that we can just put a ton of impervious surface down. There is an opportunity, especially considering wetlands here, for structured parking potentially, especially if Central Washington University is looking at expanding. That may be all on one footprint. So I hope that you'll discuss that opportunity with them as well.
Thanks.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Continuing on that same issue, the previous tenants out there that we had, one of them that was mentioned, the mega church permitted for a second building going up. All the tenants that were looking at DigiPen who came here at that point was looking at building the second building on that footprint. And so I can imagine as this goes forward, if this number of kids continues to keep going, they're going to want to be building a second building, and just like DigiPen and the mega church and the others, which is where I'm going. We need to talk to them because their future expansion will be limited, or to incorporate our own kids here by doing that if we're not careful. Additionally, you don't list here, and we have to look at the acquisition costs, because I believe they have, isn't it the end of this year that they, or is it next year that they can buy in and purchase the land, and then you'd have to negotiate acquisition as well with them.
I think it's next year, isn't it?
I mean, they've had 2 cohorts go through, so it's, and I think it's year 3 that they go through, so.
Do they have an option or just a right of first refusal?
No, well, they have the option and the
And
first
the right
rights.
of first, yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
The initial term commenced in March of 2017 and is a 3-year term.
So March.
Takes us to March.
Structured so that we encourage them to purchase the
Right,
parcel.
right, yeah. Yep.
Okay, I think we can move to that next parcel.
Okay, thank you. So this is at the this next site, the Boys and Girls Club property. It's located at the intersection of Inglewood Hill and 228th. So therefore, we see it as an advantage to be located at such a major intersection, and also the potential for shared parking exists here, given that there is a present use. And we're anticipating in here, I should mention that we're only looking at the portion on the back side, north half of the property, which is essentially already a parking area. This would be a site that the city has brought to our attention as a potential site, and for us to essentially look at the back north of the property and essentially propose a structure garage, a multi-level garage that would accommodate the 200 stalls in the back. We still have to go through the exercise to understand if that's feasible. We see it as a potential for the shared parking use. We also see that there's some good pedestrian amenities nearby, walkable to some commercial area to the southeast. We see some disadvantages, being that it requires this parking right to be multiple levels, potentially 3 to 4 levels, which would make it pretty difficult to accommodate. It may exceed the height limits that are currently for the zone 4 for the site. The project timeline would have to be timed to the city's decision-making process on how they want to proceed with this site, and also create a partnership to deliver by 2014. We feel that there's a very big disadvantage also to potentially be displacing current uses from this facility. And we also think that the vehicular access is quite difficult here, right in, right out type of scenarios, and 2 major arterials make it a difficult site for park and ride vehicles to go in and out. And it would require, needless to say, the coordination of multiple parties to achieve this.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. So more to Councilmember Stewart's point about advantages and disadvantages. When I read through this before, this one kind of stood out to me as kind of like a little bit of a red herring, to be frank with you. If you've driven down that, I'm sure you have, anyone that has driven down that hill or up that hill, there are houses overlooking the Boys and Girls Club. And if you build, I'm assuming 40 or so plus feet of concrete parking structure, that's what those folks are going to be looking at. And I would think, I mean, height restrictions, even if this is within our city height restrictions, even if we had a variance, I mean, to me, that just seems like a bad idea in a couple different ways. Yeah. You know, I don't know. I'm giving you my 2 cents. That's what we're here to do today. So I just think that location, yes, the parking in and out and the Boys and Girls Club, I just think of the people living right behind there and what they have. They purchased that home or those homes there, and looking out at that structure would be different, frankly. And I think that we need to at least take that. Just the location of this one is right next to some homes. Let me just say that. So that stood out to me as if there was one that I was like, nah, that seems like a bad idea. That was the one. So that's just my 2 cents. But thank you for including it, and look forward to seeing your matrix of how you came up with this one, because the other ones are,
Okay.
I get it. Not this one. Thanks.
Councilmember Hornish?
Yeah, I want to just make sure I'm envisioning what you're contemplating. When you say the north half in the picture up there on the black and with a little bit of green underneath, that's kind of, if I remember right, it's a raised area behind there, right? So would it be primarily limited to that north area as well? And then everything else, yeah.
Yeah, so
north,
there's
exactly.
essentially where there's currently about 70 stalls back here, it would be that.
So you'd only
footprint.
need 3 levels there too then, is that's what I'm trying to,
And then if we have to maintain the parking that's there, again, there's some negotiation work to do
that's
that.
what I wanted to understand.
So
the idea is that the Boys and Girls Club's still there, they still park,
Yeah,
use the club.
and I think that conceptualizing into a mass build of a parking, you can already start seeing what other the other councilman said, that it becomes a pretty tall structure.
Have you considered going down?
No.
It cost too much?
She was just shaking her head yes.
You considered it but discounted it because it cost so much?
Yes.
So we have some staff, some architectural staff trying to do what we call test fits because I want to understand how this fits, and they will be looking at scenarios going down. The question is, how much does that cost, and does it make sense in the end?
And we also would like to find out, at least maybe from the city, but there's a geotech report and such to be sure that we could possibly go down. So I think that's on the level 3.
Sure, okay.
Kara's might be an issue there as well. Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, so part of me initially, you said it'd be great to put it at the busy intersection. So part of me says, yay, and then part of me says, no, it's a busy intersection. But what I'd like to understand from the city, maybe the city manager can speak to this, is wouldn't Sound Transit have to get in line for this facility? Aren't there like lots of people who want to use this facility for lots of other things? And while I'm all in on transit, and I feel like, for me, transit is a huge priority, I also want to be cognizant of the fact that we have other needs in the city as well, and that if this site already has a facility on it that may be able to be used for something else that we need, should we be even considering it? So.
Thank you, Councilor. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councilor. Yes, you are correct. Obviously, before I got here, there were some ideas being thrown around for that site, as far as using it maybe for public safety along with the Boys and Girls Club, along with maybe parking city vehicles over there to allow space here at this facility, where staff can go there, pick up their city vehicles and come over. Obviously, the transit was looking at building the facility in the back, still utilizing the front. Obviously, there's a lot of construction that goes on with that. The views, the steep hill, the ingress in and out of the facility, where would be the best spot? So yes, you are correct. We were looking at this for a couple of other things as well that we could utilize. We could utilize the site for that and maybe put our park and ride at one of the other sites. That's kind of like, we're discussing.
Right.
But you are correct on that.
Okay. Because the other thing that I'm envisioning is we either get the buses to pull off, right, which would be my preference, but that gets really challenging if you're heading northbound, right? So how do the buses get in there and then get back out? I mean, you want to talk about losing minutes, that seems like a real challenge. Or you don't have the buses pull in there, which would not be my preference, and now you got a bus stopped, 20 feet from our super busy intersection. I don't know if you've been here in the morning when Eastlake and Inglewood are about to start, but you don't want a bus blocking anything there. So again, part of me likes the idea, but I guess I'm feeling like this just has some logistical challenges that feel really hard to overcome. And since there are potentially other needs for this facility that might be better suited, I guess I'm not really feeling the love on this one.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
Well, I was being polite and not even answering, so my comment on this would be, yeah, it would be on my nix-it list because it just kind of sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the other ones.
So I think this intersection is challenging because of the geometry of the lanes that come together. They do not form a right angle, which makes visibility and everything else more challenging as well. The thought of losing the boys and girls space, we're grappling, as you've heard back here, with the space in general for the city. I suppose there's the possibility of, partnering even with the city as far as the structure goes to lower the height. But I am, as well cognizant of those neighbors that back right up to that. Although I do know it's a hill, so I don't know, and the trees, without like standing in the parking lot, I have no idea whether or not they'd be able to see it or not. But my general sense is this one's just too far away from where we really want it to be. I think it does probably need to be closer to the town center. That's my take. Councilmember Valderrama.
And similar concerns about where it's being located far away from the town center. The other one was because of those intersections. As I recall, when the city gave that property for $1 a year to the Boys and Girls Club, we came with the restriction of putting in that entranceway, and that entranceway was almost, I'm trying to remember if it was 7 figures or not, just to put that entranceway in, and if to try to run buses through, that would be a very expensive, your 20 million is going to go very quickly.
So I think by and large, you've heard the council is not super favorable to this particular site. So let's go to the stormwater property.
Thanks. Okay. So our last site is another city-owned parcel, even further to the north. This is the northernmost parcel. It's we call it the stormwater property. It has a stormwater pond, retention pond on the north end of the property around this area, and it's it has a few potential. I'll focus on the disadvantages. It has potentially high construction costs because it requires to build structured parking and at least 2 levels of structured parking, and it's going to require to create some kind of underground storm water vault where the location of the stormwater pond is right now, and mitigate that. So that'll be an additional cost. And also there's a potential relocation of a cell phone tower pole on the north end of the property that would need to be studied and potentially relocated. It's also on a slightly on an erosion hazard area on the north side, slightly, and it also has some issues with the vehicular access, which may also create some traffic impacts for this park and ride on this intersection, Northeast 17th Place and 228. And it also becomes a pretty difficult site, given that the city requires the entire, or at least more than 50% of the plot to essentially accept a change, or
to clarify that, the process is called a plat alteration, so that needs a hearing examiner process.
Yeah, I think there's the high potential of LUPA going on here with a plat alteration. Just as a quick aside on this one's even further north.
Yeah.
So getting even further away from where the density lies. And I think for the same reason we just talked about in the previous scenario, where impacts to adjacent neighbors, this one is far worse as far as, right. I think, potential. It's not really congruent with what's here, which is single family housing. So.
Right. And I was going to mention that that's another disadvantage, is that there's a potential community opposition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Councilmember Ritchie.
So, thank you for the 5 options. Thank you for the 3 options.
For the 2 options.
That's, I mean, I don't know. I'm giving you my 2 cents. That's what we're here to do, right? I mean, just speaking from a 30,000.
I'm almost thinking it's 2, but.
Well, okay. I'm just trying to be cool. I mean, I think that just the Boys and Girls Club, then I'll be quiet. I won't talk anymore. Boys and Girls Club, can't see it. Stormwater property, yikes. I'm definitely willing to hear. I mean, I can just hear Mary freaking out and back about stormwater, and I can, and erosion hazard area. Anyway. So Central Washington, I can see it. I appreciate that is a legitimate issue, and I think Councilmember Valderrama brought up some issues, and Deputy Mayor Moran brought up some issues. I think that's a viable option. I think the STCA site and the JCL site are both reasonable options as well. I look at those 3 as I'd like to know more. I'd like to ask you guys to do some further digging from this position, from this seat here. So unless I'm missing something, unless there's something else that another property could, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna use this opportunity that we didn't get any questions for the JCL property, so I was just going back to the site to make sure that if there was any questions, we should daylight those now.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
That's when I had to step out. Sorry, but that's on a kind of steep slope, right?
Yes.
So that would kind of be closer to 228th, right? So part of that would be, and I think, I don't know, part of the town center plans would be to kind of utilize the entrance driveway to the town center or to the commons here, our northernmost driveway, to essentially expand that down and create another way down towards the commons, if you will, that side over here kind of following down. So
yep.
There's a light there. I'm liking that. It's farther north. It's near town, City Hall. It's stuff we could work with. I think it definitely has some positives if you keep it more to the front, right? It is part of the town center development overall. It makes more sense to me than several of the other sites. That's just I think it's one of the 3 that I come out of this little thing, and thank you for your presentation, but it's one of the 3 that I think that are more viable than the other 2. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, so I think you said you wanted 2 to 4, right? So we started with 5. I think we have almost unanimous, if not unanimous, that not Boys and Girls Club. And I think I saw a lot of nodding heads that probably not the stormwater site. I guess, would you prefer 2, or is 3 fine? I feel like the fewer we give you, if we could give you 2, because I don't think we're going to pick one now, we got to do more digging. If we give you 2, does that mean we can go more thoroughly in the next phase, or are you going to, there's just a certain level of depth you're going to go to, so 2 or 3 doesn't really matter?
2 or 3 doesn't matter.
Okay.
We'll go to the same depth of analysis.
Okay, then it probably makes sense to keep all 3 on, just out of curiosity. My biggest concern about the JCL property is just how close it is to the South Park and Ride. And, I just feel like, gosh, we're really close.
We're basically giving them 2.
And I'm not sure that makes the most sense. I realize that the other 2 aren't that much further north, but I feel like, we're trying to balance being further north but still being in the town center area. So my 2 preferences would be the Central Washington and the other town center site. Just geographically, I feel like those make sense. And then I guess, I'd like to know more about sort of what's the criteria for the next steps in terms of both of those would require partnerships, which I actually think is a good thing, because I think that means we can explore more of the public good. So I'm looking at, from my priorities is, where do we get the best taxpayer value, right? When I think about 200 stalls for $20 million, that's $100,000 a parking space. That does not seem like a good bargain to me. So your criteria of wanting to have additional public good is is really important to me, because that's how do we get the most value out of those taxpayer dollars? So I'd like to see where we can get the additional public good. I like the idea of being able to look at it and get the staff input on, how are we utilizing this transit to encourage people to use our commercial space that will be built out in the town center? How can we incorporate some intra-city transit to get people there, because there is no place in our city that's going to be walkable by the whole city. So, I like the idea of densities, which I think is why the STCA site and the Central Washington are my two favorites, because the more people that can just leave their housing unit and walk to it, the better. But what else can we be incorporating in there in terms of other transit? And that may not be your focus, but I hope that as we do this and we work with staff, that staff will be looking at what those kinds of ideas are to move people there. One of the things I'd like to understand is what's the vision of how we move people from whatever site we pick. How do we most easily move people from that site to the Marymore Light Rail, right? This is for the north end. So the primary focus, not the only focus, but the primary focus is going to be getting people to that light rail, because if I live in the north end today, I may be trying to get on a bus to go to Seattle, but when that light rail opens up, what's the fastest way to get me on the train? Because once I'm on the train, I'm only minutes away, and it doesn't matter what the traffic conditions are, my train's going to get there in the same amount of time. And it may not even matter if we've had 3 sunny days and then it's raining, the train will still get there in the same amount of time. We don't have to retrain people to drive in the rain again. So I think that I kind of want to understand which site is going to give us the most options for moving people there. I know that right now all the transit is all about 228th, but when I think about moving people to the light rail, I don't think we can discount East Lake Sammamish Parkway. That is a much more direct route to where the light rail stop's going to be. And that may not be something that Sound Transit or King County Metro are going to provide directly, but that may be something that in a partnership, the city and whoever our partner is, we should consider that, right? I mean, again, when I look at how much we spend per trips, it may be a lot cheaper to pay for a bus than it is to pay for another, for more lane miles. And so I think those are all considerations that I'd like to see and understand. And then I think we talked about already which one will have the best mitigations from an environmental standpoint, right? It sounds like they all have some environmental impact. And I think to address the green spine, it's my understanding that the code requires that all of the buildings that will be along the green spine will have a tiered or layered kind of thing as they move away from the green spine to add to the effect. Isn't that correct?
I'd have to look at the specifics on that, but I believe that depending on where along the green spine you are,
okay,
that is true.
And then I think Mayor Malchow already asked about that additional piece of property there in the town center area. I think we need to explore that as well to understand, what might be involved if that was something we wanted to look at being able to utilize that, because that does seem like that's kind of right in a sweet spot there. So. I think those were, one other question is, does the city have any plans to address the steep slope on Southeast 4th, whether we put a transit center or park and ride on there or not? Because I think that is a concern, isn't it? So, Mr. City Manager or Cheryl?
Yeah, I think Cheryl might be more appropriate to ask, but I think that ship sailed when TRF put the frontage improvements there.
Yes.
Nodding her head.
So there's nothing we can do on there at this point to try to at least smooth that out even a little bit, so it's not so much of but more of a.
At this point, there's not a lot.
Oh.
I mean, we will look into it some more, but I just don't see what else we can do.
Okay, so when we look at this project, I know, and I don't remember the plans, but the town center plan certainly called for other roads. Would there be other options to get to that location for transit other than Southeast 4th? So that would just be something that I think I'd want to know if that was an option too.
We could certainly look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hornish.
So to not help any, I'm going to be a contrarian, and the stormwater property doesn't look that bad to me. Mary, I'm sorry, but I mean, I remember when we were looking at this a year ago, there were parking lots on top of stormwater vaults that looked very appealing versus the open ponds that we use. So it kind of almost covers up an eyesore by putting the stormwater vault underneath the parking garage or parking structure. Having said that, I have some concerns about it being so far north, but yet, to Councilmember Stewart's point, I mean, it's closer to Marymore, and that actually could be good. I'm not sure exactly how you get there from that specific spot. So I have some concerns about that, but just because it's stormwater property, I'm not that against that, but I'm probably in a minority on that to do your analysis. I like a Central Washington best. I had some real concerns about the town center with the hill. I like the idea of maybe if you come in off of 228th north somewhere on some road off of there instead of going up 4th, there might be an option, something different there. So I like that idea. So I'm not going to totally discount the town center, but I have some real concerns about it with the 4th there and everything, and the green spine. JCL I can live without. I think it has some pluses and minuses, and a lot of minuses being so close and so far south. But boys and girls, no.
So the three properties that I would appreciate at least a little bit of a deeper dive on are the JCL property. I think some of the same advantages that council identified there certainly apply here as well as far as partnership opportunities. It may be that it's more costly, and so that eliminates it just based on the geography of the parcel, but I would appreciate at least knowing more. I think the STCA property would be worth exploring for the same reasons, and then the Central Washington University property. I did have one quick question as I was trying to look really quick. Is it the city of Sammamish that owns the parcel in front of the STCA property?
No.
Okay. I'm clicking on parcel viewer, and it looks like it pops up City of Sammamish, and I'm like, oh, well, that's
there was a
convenient.
partial take along the frontage for 4th.
Okay. Councilmember Valderrama.
I assume we're all weighing in on which are our options. I have the concern on the JCL property that it's too close to the south park and ride, so I'm not too keen on that one. And I also have reservations on the stormwater property as well as the Boys and Girls Club for reasons already cited. So the two that I would look at would be STCA, the primary one, because of the density that you all have claimed to be on that, and the second one, Central Washington University. Thank you.
Councilmember Ross.
Frankly, I'm not thrilled with any of these options. I get concerned whether the ones that are high cost, like the stormwater and potentially JCL, I really worry about spending or using our tax money through the Sound Transit 3, $20 million on projects that are underutilized. But with that said, since we got the toy surprise from our Happy Meal, I would look at JCL. I am concerned, like many have mentioned, that it's too far south, given that it's near the other park and ride. And I'm told the other park and ride is underutilized, which is also concerning, and I'm worried about, again, trips, utilization. STCA, I think it should be looked at, but I'm very concerned about the infringement on the green spine, and I'm hoping that the STCA can help find with us creative ways to mitigate that in particular. On the Central Washington University, I think there's some excellent points about making sure that the growth potential is considered as far as the university is concerned. And there's thought of maybe building upward versus surface. Well, surface is easy to convert and reverse without taking down trees and reversing. So that's one advantage of surface versus structure. So consider that both, the structure versus surface, but consider the surface a better solution for flexibility. Boys and Girls Club, no. Stormwater, and frankly, really, we struggle for recreation facilities in the city, and I certainly don't want to displace that. So I think, and plus the neighborhood effect potential is not good. Stormwater property, that might be cost prohibitive, but Councilmember Hornis raises a good point. You may end up making a better stormwater facility and kill two birds with one stone. However, maybe some ROMs on that, early ROMs, what that would entail costs, it may just chew up our money right away. So let me eliminate that one. So for cost reasons, stormwater may be eliminated, and the Boys and Girls Club, so consider the other three.
So I don't have any more lights on. I would make one more comment, which is I keep hearing over and over again that the parcel right next door to City Hall is so far south, but it is so close to STCA's. You can see it while you're standing in it. So they're really not very far apart. I don't differentiate those two too much. Although I do recognize that anybody who's coming to that park and ride, you know, if you're a pedestrian trying to pick up the bus, you're going to walk uphill in all likelihood from the town center. So that's a consideration as well. So, Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I just want to put one more plug in, I think, for the two sites that I think we've all expressed positive, you know, kind of feelings for. And that is, again, to not underestimate, you know, the fact that if we are going to put commercial into our city, that anything we can do that's going to drive more traffic, and I don't mean cars, I mean people, to those businesses, I think that that's something we should seriously consider, right? Any businesses that we have in our city, we really want them to thrive, and we really want them to do well because, one, that's going to support our small business owners and our business community, but that's also going to benefit the city. So by having the transit facilities where it's very easy to get off the bus and to go straight into a restaurant or whatever other commercial we'll have there, I think that's a huge advantage. So while, you know, geographically it's not that far from the STCA site to the JCL property, I think if I'm taking a bus to go to a restaurant or something else, it's probably far enough that I might rethink it. And so I just think we should really think about that. And but I think, you know, if we want to leave the third site on there, I guess I'm okay. I'd love to see us just be able to spend all of our energies on ones that I think we all agree with so that we can get the most time in terms of negotiating with the partners for the things that we want out of that facility. So that would just be my last thought there.
So I have one question based on that comment about coming to the park and ride for dinner. I'm guessing you're not going to park your car in the park and ride and go walk to dinner. So I guess it's not going to eliminate the stop that we currently have, is it? The park and ride. So we have a stop currently right in front of the Metropolitan Market. That's at Southeast 4th. That stop will probably stay there, even if we pick the JCL property, correct? So somebody who was coming to the town center has the opportunity to stop anywhere there's a bus stop, not necessarily explicitly at the park and ride, correct? We're not going to lose a stop, are we?
Not to my knowledge. Okay. I mean, obviously, buses are in their form malleable, right? You can pick them up and put them where you want to go. So I won't commit to saying, oh no, we're not going to lose a bus stop. But in all likelihood, I
just want to make sure
would.
that by picking one site over the other, we're not eliminating one place where people could likely get off and get into the town center.
Right. I would also say that any of these sites, you know, we would work with Metro to see if the nearest bus stop was close enough, and we might even add a stop somewhere.
Okay.
To service the park and ride.
Just, I guess, Mayor, on that thought, though, where we put this, so again, I'm not thinking park and ride. I know that's what Sound Transit, that's the piece that Sound Transit's going to build. But if we're going to partner with someone, I'm thinking transit center. In my mind, transit center is much more than just a park and ride. So where you want to bring all of your transit, your intra-city transit traveling around, as well as your Sound Transit and your King County Metro, as well as possibly if we have these other services, right? Microsoft, Amazon, if we decide to provide some sort of a direct service from wherever that is to the light rail, that transit center being co-located in the heart of our commercial district, or right on the edge of our commercial district, where people aren't walking up and down a hill to get to that. I feel like that's what I'm envisioning. Is it's not about a bus stop. It's about all of that transit being able to kind of weave in and out of there. And if that epicenter of all that transit is, you know, a quarter of a mile up a hill, then that may be a deterrent from people, particularly when the weather is bad or it's dark, from actually being able to do that. So that's more of what I was envisioning.
Councilmember Ross?
Yeah, I talked about underutilization. Also, it's important to consider overutilization because people need a predictable way to get to work, and 200 spaces is not a lot of capacity. So that's the flip side concern. And so thinking through that as well, because if you go to the bus stop, the parking lot or the transit lot too often and it's full and you can't get to work, you're going to stop using it because you can't risk that.
Okay. Thank you all for being here and sharing this with us, as well as the rest of whoever's watching on TV and our audience here. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. We do have a couple more slides.
Oh, you do?
If you want to leave.
Don't pack up yet. Nope, we're staying.
Okay. These are super quick wrap up.
No, please.
I do want to thank you very much for all of this feedback you've given us tonight. This is very helpful. This is the first time we've actually debuted any of these sites to the public, so you are our first touch, which actually leads me to this current slide we're looking at. On July 11th, we will have an open house for the city of Sammamish where anybody can come in and look at the hopefully the 2 to 4 sites that we're carrying forward. It sounds like there's 3, possibly. So we will have an open house on July 11th that will be here at City Hall. So anybody who is interested in coming to learn more about the Park and Ride is more than welcome to come. We will also be sending out flyers to the people of Sammamish, so you'll see those arrive in your mailboxes.
Good. Those will go to everyone's house. Every household will get one?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Good.
Great. And then, yes, thank you. All right. So I just want to take a quick step backward real quick. Last month, we were a partner at your City of Sammamish transit fair, which I heard was very widely attended, which is fantastic. We were there with a little booth about the project and, you know, sort of the ideas that have been floated to us about, you know, what the Park and Ride should be like. Here are some of our criteria. And this is actually what we heard. And I do want to take a quick moment to say we did not propose any sites at this transit fair. This was literally just people saying things to us. So CWU popped up in one of the comments that we heard. Eight comments. Eight unsolicited comments about Central Washington University. They also suggested that if the location was too far north, that it might compete with the northern park and rides outside the city of Sammamish. So I think your gut reactions about keeping it in the higher density areas is consistent with that. We also heard that, you know, environment is a very big deal to people here in Sammamish, and they don't want to see excess tree removal or any sort of big, you know, environmentally tricky issues being displaced by a park and ride. So we also heard that transit service is a big priority here, and that more transit service to the park and ride would be able to make it more successful. We hear that loud and clear. We are absolutely willing to work with you and Metro in order to figure out some solutions here in Sammamish. And then also park and ride access, you know, we'll work with the city, but this was something we heard, work with the city to fill in some missing sidewalks so people can actually walk to the transit service or the park and ride.
And I think we'll be dealing with that a little bit tomorrow night, actually.
Oh, great. All right, and then this is actually my last slide. So as far as you all, we'd love to continue to engage you. So here we are in June. We're just telling you about the public meeting here that's happening on July 11th. We're going to take your feedback that you gave us here tonight, hopefully whittle down that site list, and then give that short list to the public that night. After that, we'll sort of go into a round of public engagement. So we'll do the open house. We'll likely interact with the Chamber of Commerce again and other like big stakeholders in Sammamish to get their feedback. After that, we'll come back to you with all the findings we have about our level 3 analysis, as far as like, you know, that detailed, this is how everything's doing, this is how it scores, hopefully whittling down even more to a preferred site. Our Sound Transit Board will be making the preferred site decision, but we obviously want to hear from you about, you know, whether that preferred site is going to work. So we will be here again to get more information from you. And then hopefully by the end of this year and in the fall and winter, we will communicate to the public what the preferred site will be, and we'll move forward with actually building the park and ride.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions while we still have them here? Okay, not seeing any. Wonderful. Thank you.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.